Here is further explanation on what item variations are. So, for example, item variations are going to be non-assembly additions. My examples are duplicates or sets. And so let's look at an example that explains what would be a variation and what would not be a variation with a particular part number. So I've looked up this part number, and going through these items, it looks like this is some kind of sensor, and a majority of these are just the sensor. And then some of them are the sensor and hardware. Let's look at a picture. Okay, so this is the sensor, and then these white pieces are hardware. So that's just going to assist in attaching the sensor to some part of the car. Same with if there were like nuts or bolts. Those would be hardware pieces that would help attach it to the car. And so those things don't count as a variation. That's just going to be part of this sensor. It's going to be a part of it, like an assembly. And so non-assembly items are going to be when you need to specify a different kind of variation. Let's look at this example. So in this example, it looks like we've got a wiring harness, and we've got this sensor, which is where the part number comes from. It looks like the sensor is attached to the part here, the wiring harness. And so it's not a separate part, so this is actually an assembly. This is not a set. A set would be a wiring harness plus a sensor, and that would be a separate variation. But because this is just the part number for the sensor and it's attached to the wiring harness, it's just going to be the same as if we were looking at one of these sensors by itself or with hardware. What about if it is multiple parts? Well, that would be a set. Multiple parts that are not attached to each other are just a set, not an assembly. And so if you look at this example, we've got several pieces of a set here. We've got a motor, a few motors. This is that sensor that part number comes from, and as you can see here, it's not attached to anything, it's just separate. So this is a different variation. So it looks like if we go through here, we have some sets, and then we just have some assemblies, and then we have the actual part. And so that leaves us with only two variations, it looks like. And so if we go to quantity listed, our part number is here. We're going to have two variations. So we're going to have one variation here and then another here. Let's call this one just the sensor, and that would include also the sensor attached to the wiring harness would be just the sensor. And this one would be a sensor set, or it would be a set plus the motors, however you want to explain it so it's clear that it's different from the first one. So this is, I'm going to call it a sensor set. So now we're going to go through and count how many of these we have and how many of these we have. It looks like we have two assemblies, two sets, or sorry, not two assemblies, two non-assemblies, which is that second variation. So I can count that one, and then I can just subtract the 2 from, we automatically know that's going to be 0. I can subtract the 2 from the total. And so I've got a total of 44, so that means that we've got 42 that are just that regular. And we're going to delist all but 2 of them, so that means we're going to delist 40. So then you can go through and delist those. So that's an example of that definition. So let's review it one more time. It says hardware attaching to the part of a car won't count as an item variation. That's just part of the part. And then item variations are going to be non-assembly additions, such as duplicates, which is more than one of the same part not assembled to make one part. So that would be like those motors. Well, no, that would be if we had multiple sensors. So if we had like 3 sensors pictured together, they're not attached to each other. That would be duplicates. And then we looked at those in previous examples in these videos. Now a set would be different parts that are not assembled together to make one part. So that would be what we looked at with those motors. And so that's my item variation definition.